But this week we wanted to talk about keto. I think it's really important to talk about it.
Because it's really popular right now.
It is super popular right now. And so it's important to talk about like what it is. I think it's important to talk about how to do it correctly if you do decide that it's a good fit for you, who that it's going to be a good fit for, who it's not a good fit for, and we kind of just get into anything. So if you have any questions about keto while we're talking about it today, throw it in the comments, and then we can make sure that we address them as we're chatting today. So let's start first and foremost at the beginning, at the baseline. What is keto or a ketogenic diet?
So ketogenic diet is really like a high-fat strategy diet where your grams of carbs are anywhere between 20 and 30 grams of carbs a day. But also it is a pretty moderately high protein diet as well. And I think that's sometimes where the miss is. Everyone's like thinking it's just low carb and like high fat, and they're forgetting about how much protein you need to be eating.
Right. And so some people will put keto in kind of an Atkins similar category, but one of the major differences I would say between the two is keto is, I would say, more of a moderate protein approach because protein can actually too much protein can actually kick you out of ketosis. And so so we say this word keto a lot. Like what does that mean?
So it's basically your body using ketones as energy sources in your body instead of glucose. That is really the premise of it.
So our body in a normal carb-fed state uses glucose, sugars, right, to fuel our cells or to eventually create ATP, which fuels our cells. And so we have an alternative fuel source in our body called ketones, and we're always producing ketones,
and we're always using them
level.
For energy. We are using them for energy. Like
it's not the dominant energy source.
Well, it's not as easy of a transfer. Right. So when you remove the really easy transfer, carbohydrates and glucose from being easily available, your body will start using ketones, and the glucose you have, your body needs to store and like kind of hold on to when you need that immediate boost. So it primarily wants to burn what is going to be readily available, and if you're feeding it fats and like a higher fat diet, your body is going to have ketones available, and it's going to know like I need to be using this, and it takes longer, so I need to get to work.
So one of the reasons why ketones and ketosis became really popular was, and really what ketosis means, and not to be confused with ketoacidosis, which is a condition I believe that happens with diabetics. But ketosis is basically when the ketone levels in your blood reach a certain like millimole is what they're measured in, so that you become the main energy source is ketones. What's super interesting about ketones, right? And from a physiological standpoint is before we had food readily available, we had periods of time where we didn't have very much food or we were searching for food, right? And so we had periods of like quote unquote starvation. And so ketones are actually a really interesting way that our body can create a slightly different energy source to fuel us. And because that energy source is created out of fat, that's where the whole like I do ketosis to, reduce the body fat, reduce the fat that's on my body. And so that's why it's slightly interesting in ketones, and keto is actually super interesting in like traumatic brain injuries because ketones can fuel the brain as well.
It can be really great for women who are having hormone imbalances, have been on a super low fat diet for a really long time because your hormones need fat. That's how they're created. That's how you make hormones. So like it can be really beneficial for women that have been really low fat for a long time. It can be really beneficial, I've seen, for like some metabolic syndromes or different amounts of autoimmune. So that would be type 1 diabetes, Hashimoto's, like conditions like that. You can see a lot of benefits for people who've done it. I've also seen, I have a friend who works primarily with cancer patients because she is a cancer survivor, and along with her husband. And she is a nutritional therapist too, and they work with cancer patients, and they do keto with them, and they've seen a lot of success there too.
There's some interesting stuff with cancer and keto, and also fasting with some cancer stuff and chemo, like kind of putting them in conjunction. But where like this type of diet, this diet has been used for a really long time, especially in like an epileptic population. They found that people that suffer from, I believe it's epilepsy, correct me if I'm wrong, but they found that if they put kids on this type of diet, that they have less episodes. And so it's super interesting. And so it's been around in the medical field. For
what kind of diet were these kids on before? Like
standard.
Okay, so I mean, so I'm not gonna say that is wrong. Like this is better, but epilepsy in children a lot of times can be linked to like highly processed foods and food colorings and food, like all of this stuff. But it's still really cool to think about like using nutrition to help your body heal itself, because a lot of times hey Jen, we don't think of food as medicine, but foods are our original medicine. We used to gather herbs and roots and all this kind of stuff to heal ourselves. So it's basically going back to the basics and using food as a source to help us feel our best. That's why what you eat matters. So that is it. So on this episode, the plan was to have me show you guys how to blood test and see if I was in ketosis. In case you didn't know and you've missed some weeks of episodes or something, I'm going to move. Today, so far, I've had water and 2 cupcakes to eat because I didn't have. This is
confession right now.
So like, we talked about
that is not compliant.
But no, but we talked about like reasons why you shouldn't follow a nutrition strategy and that kind of stuff. In times where your body is highly stressed, eating food and like eating normal meals is probably more important than whether you're in ketosis or whether you're following intermittent fasting or you're carb cycling or you're doing all of those things. Like it's okay to like, it's okay for it to go through a period of time where like you want to follow a strategy and you can't, but just knowing like now isn't the right time for that.
So when you first started this, you didn't know, like this was before.
I didn't really realize all of the things were going to be like all of the things were, like that we were going to leave as quick as we were, and our house ended up like all of it, just everything became way more than what I expected it to be. And I just decided like instead of adding another stressor to my plate, I was going to take one away, and following a nutrition strategy is something I can remove from my life and just eat what's available and not make people cook special things, or like, you know, I'm going to people's houses and eating food and going out and all of that stuff. And it's just too much to do all of the things. And like,
so I think right there is like a really important, if you are going to follow a very specific strategy that requires very dialed in approach, like keto, like if you just had some cupcakes today and you were doing keto, you're not doing keto anymore because your body has now shifted away from that to
completely
glucose dominant. And so you need to be like all in on something like keto. You're either all in or you're not. If you're not, we call it low carb. Like you're just trying to eat lower carb probably.
Yeah.
And so you're
I'm not trying to do that right now either.
Ketosis. Right. So ketosis means our blood millimoles are above a certain number, and I'll figure out what that actual number is.
I don't know off the top of my head.
So it's important, I think, to just realize where you're at in life. And so that's where a lot of times when we think about just what's my normal eating strategy? How do I normally want to live? And we have those principles that can be applied no matter what's going on, but understanding that stressful times, and then you're going to change things a little bit. Like you might have a couple cupcakes and water for breakfast. Like, cool, it happens. But if it happens for 2 months, it now becomes an issue.
Yeah, but also knowing like, I know there's an end date. So like my plan is once I get down there, we get settled, probably right at the beginning of August, I will probably go back on keto. So we will probably revisit keto again when I can actually like, we can do a blood test and we can kind of talk about like things, how everything has changed as I've kind of progressed too, to give you guys a little bit idea.
So I was looking up the level of, so they said the sweet spot for keto is about 1.5 to 3 millimoles per liter. And so how you would actually tell if you're in ketosis is there's 2 ways. There's a urine strip that you can pee on a strip and it will change the color.
I should have brought that stuff as show and tell.
That's all right. We can bring it another time. So that works really well at the beginning, but then as your body adapts, it's not as accurate. The best way to do it, or the second way is breath. So they have like an acetone reader that you breathe into, which is, I don't know a ton on the accuracy there. I think it's pretty good at this point. But then there's also a blood test, kind of like if you see a type 2 diabetic where they take their blood and put it into a little glucose monitor. Right, same thing, it just measures ketones. So 1.5 to 3 millimoles is kind of the like sweet spot for that. So that's what we mean when we're in ketosis. If we're below that, we're not in ketosis. We're still glucose dominant, right?
Which isn't necessarily bad for
No.
everyone. Like, so keto is
But
really
there
interesting.
is like a middle ground that's like awful.
There is a middle ground that's awful. So don't be in the like,
Kind
I'm
of
at 35
keto.
grams of carbs. Like,
Right.
be at 50. Like,
Right.
if you're just gonna be low carb, be at 50.
Yeah,
Or like,
there's this middle ground where you can, and the other thing too, I think to just touch on when people first start is there's a transition period when your body is transitioning from glucose dominant to ketone dominant that is not very enjoyable.
it's called the keto flu.
So
It's kind of awful.
as your body's adapting to using upregulating enzymes and hormones for the new energy source.
As Trevor's gonna probably talk some more about, to answer your question, Patrice, we will answer it. But the other thing is that when you're on keto, it's not just being super, super low carb and only having your carb there. You need to still be eating a reasonable amount of calories throughout the day. And if you are a grown adult, 1,200 calories is probably not that number. So just something to think about, like, are your calories too low? It is a high probability that it is. So you need to be eating a certain amount of calories from fat, a certain amount of calories from protein, and a certain amount of calories from carbs. 30 grams is about the highest end I would start anyone on. So like,
And this is going to be dictated by your testing.
yeah,
Like, you need to be
it
tested.
can be adjusted as you progress, but most people 30. Some people can swing a little bit higher and stay in ketosis depending on their activity levels and how active and fit they are. My guess is Trevor could probably be a little bit higher because he uses carbs better than someone like me who will need to be in the lower end. Next, protein. It needs to be a moderate amount of protein, but we're still talking about like 2 times your body weight in kilos. So like, if I'm 64 kilograms, I should be eating 124 grams of protein. Pretty easy number. Okay, I went with kilograms because the conversion's a little bit better than going from pounds because it's not quite 1 for 1. It can be for weight, but it could also be done if you are using our InBody in the gym and you wanted to do it. If your muscle mass was 55 pounds, you could double your muscle mass, and that's how many grams of protein you want to be eating. And that's usually about how I would start for calculating macros for someone on keto.
So keto is a very like scientific process. It's not like maybe like clean eating or something like that, where it's just like, oh, we're shifting around.
Can we talk about the diet eating strategy of clean eating?
It's like how like we should eat most of the time,
Okay.
like eat real foods, right? So it's a slightly more scientific process. So you should already have a good understanding of macronutrients and what foods make up are primarily fats, which foods are primarily protein, which foods are carbs, and like we need to have a good general understanding before we embark on something like this, or else you're going to make yourself go insane. Or there's going to be a learning curve first that in order for you to execute this.
And I use a tracking sheet just so like you guys don't think I'm just doing numbers and math. Like I literally was checking off boxes of how many grams of everything that I was eating. And
Right.
I can, if you guys are really interested in doing it, I'm happy to show you what that stuff looks like too.
So keto is definitely an advanced strategy that we don't suggest most people start at. We'd start at more of like a real food eating strategy, maybe manipulating carbs a little bit with some carb cycling, and then eventually moving into a keto as your understanding of nutrition and food improves. So Patrice, I want to just answer your question while you're, if you're still on here, but so you asked about cholesterol. Does it affect your cholesterol? So we are eating more amounts of fat, right? And fat is directly connected with cholesterol. But what they found in studies with keto is your triglycerides go down, which is a good thing. Lower triglycerides is a good thing. Your HDL cholesterol number goes up, also a good thing. A good analogy that was given to me in university was HDL is like the garbage trucks where it goes and picks up stuff, and LDL are like the dump trucks that dump stuff into our arteries. And so HDL, good, picking stuff up, that goes up, good. But in some people, LDL levels can rise as well, and so that's why it's probably a good idea to have some blood work done as you're going throughout this, because you may get to a point where it's just not benefiting you the same way that it did before. there's a lot of debate on LDLs and whether or not like high LDLs
And there's a lot of interesting research being done on cholesterol levels in women, and most women that are living longer lifespans have slightly higher cholesterol.
So like there's a lot of interesting
and it's a ton of in like what I have read and have seen is about like they're wondering if it's because it's assisting women's hormone levels, and women have a tendency to eat lower fat, and that's who we're comparing it to. Especially women of a certain age in certain age ranges have been very, very low fat for so long. So women that are doing a little bit higher fat and having a little bit higher cholesterol are having a little bit better hormone response in their body.
And one thing to think about if you are going to go ketone or you are going to do a keto diet is you're going to be consuming a lot less food. Typically, because if you're consuming more fat is really calorically dense, and like I'll give you an example, like a tablespoon of olive oil is like 110 calories or something like that, 120 calories. That's like just a tablespoon of oil is like 100 calories, which isn't very much volume, right? And so there is an adaptation process to the amount of food that you're eating, and just kind of mentally being okay with less food. Because you're going to be eating a lot of
veggies are very cheap though. Lettuce is very cheap, and you can put a lot of lettuce on your plate.
Right. So like you're going to be bulking with things like vegetables, right? And really lower sugar vegetables. So we're thinking leafy greens, even carrots can not necessarily be the best thing, especially if you're eating a lot of them. Leafy greens, cauliflower, broccoli.
So I go really, really leafy green, but I still have stuff like kombucha. Like, and I take my hit and I drink my freaking bubbly beverage with sugar in it, and I move on. But I do less, and I do measure. But like there are ways to have stuff and make stuff work.
So that's where the testing comes into play, right? So you can like test, like, hey, when I have this, what does it do to my blood levels? And you could find that, hey, you're able to get by with a little bit more and stay in a ketotic state. The other thing is too, and sometimes these are good things to experiment with. Like if you're just into this stuff and you have a good kind of mental capacity to try new things. Because what this does is actually forces our body to use a different type of fuel, right? It forces us to really use fat and use ketones to fuel our body, which then makes us more what we call metabolically flexible. So it means we can shift back and forth from carbs to fats. And metabolic flexibility is probably one of the most important things with nutrition, which allows us to be successful long term. And so that's why I think changing up dietary strategies from time to time is a good thing, because it keeps the body guessing.
Well, and I find a lot of people that they do low carb and that kind of stuff, and they end up being very, very low calorie too, because they don't increase their fat. So I have found with a few people that I've been working with lately is their calories have just been so low. We've been trying to build them back up, and that's definitely something you need to watch with if you're doing keto, because if you aren't hitting all those numbers and you're only hitting carbs and protein, and you're not getting enough fat. You're gonna be really, really low carb, and that's not or low calorie, and that's not necessarily the whole idea of the strategy. The idea is to hit all of the numbers and be in the right spot, and then you can adjust the numbers, whether you need more calories or less calories, based on that.
Right. So I mean, I think these are all just important things to weigh when you do it. Things I would ask a client, if they're ready to do this, what does your life look like for the next month or 2 months? That's going to be a big factor in whether or not you're able to successfully do it. That would be probably number one, the most dominant thing. How would assess their understanding of different foods, and do they feel like they have the knowledge base in order to be able to complete this? Are they comfortable with tracking their macros? Are they able to weigh food? Are they able to do things accurately? Are they willing to invest in a meter so that they are able to track their blood throughout? Like, so if you kind of check all the boxes, and it's like, all right, do it. If you're not able to, it's like maybe this isn't the right approach. Maybe just try a lower carb approach and see if that's. And ultimately, we probably go back to what is the goal, right? Like, what do you want to accomplish from all of this? And if it's weight loss, could there be another way that you could do it that maybe isn't as challenging?
Yeah. So for someone like Trevor or myself or other like professionals, like we will try different things, because we need to know, like, to explain what it feels like to kind of go through is a lot easier if you've gone through it and you've kind of dug through the trenches, like to prep for anything or kind of prepare for it. If you don't really know what carb flu feels like or keto flu feels like, it's really hard to tell clients to just keep pushing or like give them tips to be able to do it unless you have things that you successfully did to make it past kind of some of those humps in the beginning.
So there is one supplement that can work really, really well to help transition, and it's called exogenous ketones. It's just like a powder. Typically it tastes awful, and it helps. So you're using, exogenous means outside the body, right? And so we're ingesting ketones into our system to artificially raise the ketone levels in our blood, which can help with this transition time. And can also, some people will take exogenous ketones like in the morning because they just want a higher ketone level in their blood because it helps brain function and other things. So using exogenous ketones early in the process can be an easier transition from carb dominant to more ketone, fat dominant. So something to just be aware of. But yeah, so it's super interesting. Super interesting strategy. It has been around. I was doing some stuff in the 1920s is when people started using it with intractable epilepsy. It was proposed as a dietary treatment that would produce similar benefits to fasting, which is already recorded in the Hippocratic collection. So high fat content, 90%-ish, low to moderate protein content. And you have to be careful with protein because protein can be insulinogenic and kick you out. And then pretty low carb, probably 30 grams. Other places will say 50, but it's really going to be dependent on your carb tolerance. And so some people will be able to get away with more, others with less. And how we know is testing. Okay.
I mean, one of the big things with, especially with keto and just a lot of things that I just say in general when working with nutrition clients, the things that we measure get managed. If you don't measure, you can't manage it. So,
who's that quote from?
I don't know.
Famous business consultant.
I don't know.
Can't think of his name right now.
I don't know.
So
good job, Trev.
Can be a great strategy. Use with the right person at the right time. But just if you're going to do it right.
And this is one that you need to be a little bit more advanced for. Like, I wouldn't just be like, I'm going to change all my eating habits and I'm going to do keto. Chances are most people who are going to do that are probably doing more low carb than keto.
Yeah. Which is not a bad thing.
No, not at all.
But it's
like,
calling it what it is.
Exactly. And it almost kind of drives me nuts because I'm like, oh, what are you doing? And then they tell me, and I'm like,
So, right. Tons of resources out there if you're going to do it.
If you are really considering it, Diane Sanfilippo has a keto quick start book, and it has tons of. That is
your
my cookbook crush.
Cookbook crush.
Yes, sure. She has a really awesome book to get someone started, and it has a bunch of stuff in it. And I've used tons of resources, so.
There's tons and tons of resources out there. Probably too many resources.
Well, I just like everything. So if you're gonna do it, stop over researching it.
Right.
Pick someone, follow what they encourage, because otherwise you can research it to death before you do it.